Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from the Web Dev 101 podcast. It's been a while since I've put out a new episode, but I thought I'd put out a new episode and just talk about some of the things that have been interesting me in web development. Things that I've been playing around with lately are things like Deno. I really enjoy Deno. Now, if you're not familiar with what Deno is a new JavaScript runtime from the people who created Node. Okay, it's what they would have wanted Node to be had things like async await existed, ES6 imports, had those things existed when Node was created. Okay, and it's pretty cool. So when you have ES6 imports right out of the gate, that's just sort of how you do importing, exporting of libraries. And it basically, the way it works, instead of pulling from like a central repository, you import from like a URL. And the way Deno works, it's kind of similar to Maven for JavaScript. Like once it pulls it in once, it kind of keeps a sort of central repository. So if you pull a library you've pulled from a previous project, you don't have to re-download it again. So it's not like a Node where everything is in every Node modules folder over and over again, which is pretty cool. So then what happens instead is it just pulls from this. If it's not in that computer, it will download it. If not, then it pulls from the central repository, refers to it, which I think is pretty cool. So that's pretty neat, which makes dependencies pretty easy to manage. Sort of the convention I'm seeing the C kind of rise up is that people do a dep.ts file, and they do all their initial imports there and then export their dependencies. This way, all their dependencies are sort of imported through one file, even though they may be used throughout their application. So that's a thing that I've noticed. So it's like, and then that's the other point. TypeScript is a first-class citizen in Deno. So no longer do you have to download a separate package and then translate it to JavaScript. Deno is also a runtime for TypeScript. So you can just run TypeScript natively through Deno, which is really cool. And it runs the code. And so that's pretty cool. One of my other really favorite features is that you have top level async await. So you don't have to always put things in functions with the async keyword in order to use the await command. You can just use the await command out of the box at the top level, which is really cool. So you can just literally just write await fetch right there outside of a function, which is pretty handy. So that's all really cool stuff. And there's also the whole security thing where basically everything is kind of shut off from the get-go, so you have to make sure you put all the right flags when you run things. So it's like allow HTTP, allow files. Basically out of the box, all you can really do is like console log stuff. But if you want to allow it to like create an HTTP server, you have to flag it when you run the file. You have to flag if you want it to be able to edit files. You have to flag it when you edit the files. And the idea is just so that way someone just kind of like remotely try to run a file without the flags, or something just ran the file by accident, it's not going to do stuff. Okay, the idea is that it's supposed to be sort of inherently secure, which is not a bad feature. You get used to typing in the flags after a while. So I've done Deno. I created a different video with a couple of the different backend frameworks that exist for Deno. Probably the most popular being Oak. I also did Pogo, which I liked a lot, just because it had a really nice ability to use JSX pretty much from the get-go. And that was another thing, like using JSX server-side was pretty straightforward using Deno. So basically, just creating JSX templates was pretty straightforward. So if you watch my videos, I kind of go over how to do that. And I've just been making a lot of videos in general on web components, on Java. I actually did a whole video series on Java and Spring. So you can check those out. Again, all my videos, you can find the playlists over there at devnursery.com. And if you're over there at devnursery.com, make sure you join the Slack community and the Discord community so you can meet other cool devs and fun stuff. Other cool technologies I've been playing with. Today I was actually building a GraphQL boilerplate, just like a boilerplate for me to create some GraphQL applications using GraphQL Yoga. So if you go to my repository, you can find my GraphQL boilerplate. Literally, it's set to go, so you can just like download it, fork it, clone it, and you're pretty much set to go do a GraphQL project. Just start building your resolvers and queries, and you're good to go. And it has some basic middleware like cores and whatnot. Also did a video series on Polka. Polka is a backend framework in Node that's very similar to Express, just a little bit more lightweight. I first found out about Polka when I was playing with Svelte. Svelte, again, is like another front-end framework similar to React, Vue, Angular. And Svelte has its own server-side rendered framework called Sapper. Sapper is similar to Next.js for React or Nuxt.js for Vue, where it handles sort of server-side rendering within that framework. And in there, they use Polka at their core to handle the back-end routing and all that stuff within that server-side rendered environment. So I started playing around with that framework on its own. It's pretty much like Express, just a little. Supposedly, it's like more lightweight and quicker. So certain things that like Express has out of the box, it doesn't have out of the box. But it's not quite as bare bones as Koa, where like Koa, you have to kind of like really just bring everything, and it still has that same rec res type handler instead of like wrapping everything in a context object like Koa does. So that's pretty cool. Other things I have done recently, again, lots of different video series. I started learning the Ballerina programming language. The Ballerina programming language is really cool. It's a programming language geared towards sort of modern web development, using like cloud services. So it has like built-in libraries for working with like Amazon Web Services, for connecting to databases, working with Docker images. So you could literally like build out like the application can build itself out as a Docker image and then run itself within the code. It's pretty cool. And the language itself isn't too hard to learn. If you've done somewhere between Java and JavaScript, far as the syntax and verbosity, so if you're familiar with any kind of language that runs in the JVM, whether it's Kotlin, Java, this case Ballerina, it's not too crazy. But I'm liking it, and definitely going to be planning to do more and more videos and stuff about Ballerina. You can find the playlist over there at devnursery.com. Other cool things that have been fun to play with. I've just been doing my usual teaching at GA, so just a lot of, MERN stack stuff. I think right now, both of the cohorts I'm teaching, we're going to be getting into Ruby on Rails soon. So it'll be nice to sharpen my skills with Ruby on Rails for a bit. Then Django I'm already pretty comfortable with. So a lot of web stuff. That's what I do. I'm a web dev. Trying to think what other technologies have been really fun to play with lately. I just like learning new languages and trying the different front-end frameworks. I did mention that I did Java Spring recently, which is a lot of work. I've always heard rumors about how verbose Java is, but yes, it is very verbose. If you watch my videos on Java Spring, you can see there's a lot of setup. I mean, once you know how to do it, it's not too bad, but just certain things about like lower level languages, particularly working with arrays and the fixed sizeness of arrays and the inflexibility of arrays versus like JavaScript and Python arrays, can be difficult, to get used to. But Spring is an in-demand thing, so if you want to learn how to use the basics of Spring Boot, then do check out my videos on Java and Spring. I think that's mostly the new stuff that I have done. I've created a few new Vue videos, and I kind of redid all my language videos on Go. Like, basically what happened is I got all the JetBrains IDEs. So that's like RubyMine, Goland, PHP Storm. So I went and redid all my tutorials on all those languages using those IDEs. And plus, especially since now I know a lot more than I did when I originally did those tutorials. So you can go check those out. Again, devnursery.com is where you can find all my video playlists. I'm trying to think if there's any other languages that I've played with. Oh yeah, ReasonML. I was playing with the ReasonML, which is a little bit of a learning curve, because has some functional flair, but it wasn't too bad. It was an interesting language. There's some interesting ideas, like the way they use switch statements was pretty interesting. Go check out those videos where I walk through not only ReasonML but OCaml, which is a functional programming language. But there is an implementation of OCaml in Node, But OCaml is definitely harder to learn than ReasonML. ReasonML is sort of like this in between JavaScript and OCaml. So it has like a lot of OCaml features, but a very JavaScripty type syntax. And then OCaml is just, it's OCaml. And it isn't too bad. Again, there's some interesting concepts in the way it works. Like when you run through it, like it definitely, you have to learn to think about expressions and your statements in a slightly different way. Not in as painful a way as like Lisp, where everything's a parenthesis. Like parentheses within parentheses within parentheses. Or R, which is very similar. But yeah, that's cool stuff. Aside from that, that's pretty much what I've been spending my time on. I think if there's anything else that's particularly captured my interest. Docker, because I was learning Deno, I went and learned Docker a little bit more in depth, because the only way I could really find to install, to like deploy Deno was through Docker images, because there really wasn't like a build pack on Heroku, and I didn't want to set up a VPS and have to like configure Deno every time I wanted to deploy a project. So I was using this website called fly.io, which allows you to deploy Docker images. Even though you could deploy Docker images on Heroku, I just haven't really explored that yet. But fly.io lets you deploy a Docker image really easily. It's not free, but there's a free tier. Basically, what they do is they give you a credit of $10 every month. So the first $10 with services, which is really like one deployment, is free. Yeah, so that was pretty straightforward. And then basically being able to just like fire up a Docker image, put some files on it, and then deploy the thing was actually really not that hard. So I really enjoyed that. You can watch my videos on Deno where I actually walk through how I deployed Deno. And then I even added my own custom image for the purposes of deployment of Deno. Which, again, it's all in that video. Also, I created Merced Reactor. Merced Reactor is kind of like my own version of Create React app. The benefit of Merced Reactors is that like the ending like size of sort of when you're starting out point, like if you use Create React app, like the project's I think 130 megs after everything's installed. So it's kind of bloated. Great if you're building like a production app, but if you just want to do like React practice, not necessarily the best choice. Then a colleague of mine, Arthur Bernier, who's actually also the creator of his own front-end framework called Kofu.js, which is worth checking out. It's like a cross between Vue and React. He created his own sort of Create React app called Big Papa Code, which you can find in the NPM registry. And that one is kind of built for you to be able to kind of have your React application served by an Express server. So that way you can have like your API and your front-end React application all sort of in one build. So there's that one. Merced Reactor is purely like, that's the one I created. You can find it also on NPM. And that just allows you to spin up a quick TypeScript or JavaScript template for React. And it does on, instead of more like 70, 80 megs versus the 130. So I think it's like 130 for Create React app. I think like 102 for Big Papa Code once it's all spun out. And then Merced Reactor comes in at like 80. So and it loads pretty quick, because instead of like the command doing everything, Merced React just clones the template and then you hit npmi. So that way you can at least begin, working in the files while you wait for all the dependencies to install, instead of having to wait for like the whole thing to finish before you can really do anything. So that's Merced Reactor. I have videos on that as well. Also, I don't know if I've talked about this, but I've also created a whole bunch of libraries for web components, such as Merced UI, which creates like base classes for creating web components that allow you to create web components in a very React kind of style that has props built in, state built in, so that way your web components can feel a lot, not exactly like a React component. And again, the difference is when you pass in props to a web component, it's just a text string. You can't pass like a whole object or a function, or at least not easily. And I don't want to make it too complicated. So you can check out those libraries. They do allow you to make, and there's a couple of different ones, because there's a couple different takes on web components that I chose to take. If you want to kind of try out all of them, there's a library called Component Zoo, which has all my base classes for web components. So you can try out the different ones. The documentation's there. It's it was a lot of fun making them. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to report right now. If you guys have anything you guys want me to talk about, just leave me a comment over there on LinkedIn. Just add me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter, Alex Merced Coder, or on Instagram, Alex Merced Coder. Always love to talk about web development and try out new frameworks and report my thoughts. So have a great day and enjoy.